Hello and welcome back, adventurers. This is Captain TTRPG, and today we're talking about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Hello and welcome back, adventurers. Today's video is inspired by another one of my recent videos, one of my recent editorial videos, the Martial Caster Divide video. And it relates to what was kind of a smaller piece of that video about adventure paths. I had some nice comments about it, and I do want to address something that I think is very critical around encounter design. In that video, I discussed how, at least what I had seen from adventure paths and what I've seen online in the discussion about adventure paths, is those encounters more straightforward because they're designed for any and all parties. Now, that's not me saying there's anything wrong with adventure paths. I think they're very well done, as is pretty much everything Paizo does, honestly. They do a nice job with them. And third-party content is always really amazing because people who have a passion for it do a great job as well. And so sometimes those may also be more straightforward, but it's not because they don't want it to be the most challenging or grandiose encounters you've ever seen. It's because they also need to account for any party that may exist. But here's the thing. In your games, it's just your party. And today I want to focus on just that. How to make encounters for your party. The first thing to remember when you're thinking about encounters for your party, when you're designing them or workshopping them at all, is that you know the strengths and weaknesses of your party. You know what they're capable of and their tendencies. Whatever those may be, you know them. And while they will change over time, there is a certain level of staticness to their abilities, or at least you understand every time they gain new strengths or potentially weaknesses. When I talk about this, now this could be either mechanical with the characters they've got, or this could be about their play style. I GM for a couple of different groups that actually have fairly similar mechanical abilities, but the playstyles couldn't be more different. And so my encounters have to adjust for both parties, even though they're going through the same adventure and they're slightly apart from each other. I adjust the encounters for each party just enough because I know their strengths and weaknesses, and I know how they themselves play their characters. If you choose to take any advice from this video, which, I don't know if it's worth it, but if you do, remember that any advice I give here, it relies on the fact that you know your party. You know them inside and out, because everything hinges on that. For instance, do you run a game for murder hobos? Probably, knowing a lot of parties, but maybe that's not it. Or maybe you run a game for social encounter players. Maybe those with investigatory tendencies who want to know the background of every aspect of the world and want to dive deep before ever running into any kind of combat. Maybe you run it for a bunch of martial characters with a couple of nature casters who are excellent at maneuverability and clogging up the environment. Maybe your entire party can fly. Answers to these questions, they're going to help guide your encounter building strategy that will eventually lead to a more fun and challenging campaign that feels rewarding at every step. No doubt if you've made it this far and you run mostly adventure paths, you're asking yourself, why am I still here? He's talking about building his own encounters. I promise you, with every point I make as we go forward, I'm going to bring it back to how it impacts encounters from adventure paths. Because everybody should be able to use some part of this advice, I think, to help cater towards and away from their own team on purpose. So what is the first ingredient to great encounters for your party? Design with the individuals in mind. Well, that sounds counterintuitive, you might say. PF2e is a cooperative game after all. Why would I focus on individual players? The campaign as a whole, and even every given chapter of that campaign, if you look at it that way, should be conquered and viewed as a party activity to complete. Completely agree with you. Playing and tackling challenges as a team is what's going to make everything feel amazing when you look back at the entire campaign. Each encounter should not only allow, but require the team to play together to succeed. What I mean about thinking about the individuals is everyone deserves a chance to shine. When you plan encounters, whether that be combat, social, or exploration, keep in mind the special abilities, spells, or even just some of the preferences of each of your players. If you have an air kineticist, for instance, and that player has taken the feat to allow flight, but the rest of the party is earthbound, but you want to plan an upcoming exploration encounter in a way that allows your kineticist to fly up to aid your party in some way as one option, they're going to be able to feel amazing when they flew up to that cliff and tied a rope onto the rock to allow everybody to climb up, which made it far easier than them having to construct some weird contraption out of the local trees to try to build themselves some weird stair thing to do it instead. Your air kineticist shines, your party still had another option of how to beat it, but you still succeeded as a team. Perhaps you have a character that excels at ranged combat, but struggles to show value when enemies are regularly getting into melee combat with other martials. This could be the perfect opportunity to place some enemies up high at points where these melee martials will struggle to get to them. Still could. You know, the balcony up above, yes, I can go run up the stairs back over here and then come up behind them, but that's going to take me 2 turns to even get up to them. Whereas that gunslinger of yours or your ranger can take some nice pot shots from down below or even hide behind a pillar, pop out and get them off guard before taking a shot, allowing that ranged character who might otherwise struggle to look as strong when everybody's all on one plane and rushing them to now look like, boy, they can just pick off all these minions for you guys while you worry about the giant abomination in the middle of the room. And then we've got spellcasters. Spellcasters are very versatile, and oftentimes they end up taking some spells that are more situational. Okay, that situation may not come up all the time, but if they've had the same situational spell that they were excited about, and it's been 3 sessions, maybe you don't have an encounter built around it, maybe you don't have something that requires it, but you have an encounter that allows it to shine. And that's really valuable. Just adding some small tweak to an encounter to make that situational spell that maybe, blocks some optional exit or utilizes the environment in some very interesting way, allowing that to play a pivotal role if the caster remembers they have it, so they can finally use that spell that they've wanted to use all along, but it's not necessary to win the combat. Again, teamwork should always win, even if a specific line of thought isn't taken by the team, but if it is, that means that character really gets to show off what makes them special. Let me give you an example from one of my own games. In one of my parties, I have an investigator, and investigators are already good at quite a few different things, but knowing the encounters is probably one of the things they're best at, and he has taken a lot of feats to make himself really good at recall knowledge, pretty much for any situation he needs, whether it's something outside of combat or very much recalling knowledge about monsters in combat. I had designed one combat in particular where the team was going to be fighting a lot of trolls, and the idea here is, okay, generally speaking, everybody knows about trolls. You don't need to do a lot of recall knowledge for people just in the party, players themselves, to know that trolls are generally weak to fire, and fire is a way to shut down their regeneration. Again, things that are just kind of well known. Well, I wanted this to be a chance for the investigator to be a potential MVP. So amongst the trolls that are in there, there's at least one type of troll that wasn't weak to fire. That's not how you shut off its regeneration. That wasn't what was going to be super effective. And of course, they're going along and didn't feel the need to recall knowledge because, hey, they had it. It's trolls. Until they got to the type of troll that suddenly wasn't weak to fire. It was regenerating, and it was holding up against the party way better than they thought. Come the investigator, some recall knowledge, and a few quick seconds later, suddenly the party knew exactly what element to use and how to shut down regeneration and wiped the floor with the final trolls like they weren't even there. Could the party still have won without this? Absolutely. Did this recall knowledge, did this understanding of the enemies make the investigator the MVP of this party? 100%. They had their moment to shine. It felt great. This team still had to work together. The investigator didn't beat the trolls by themselves afterward, but they provided the right knowledge so that other team members could actually shut off regeneration while others still dealt out tons of damage to keep them down. Party still came together to win, but investigator played a critical role and gave the piece of information that turned the tides of combat. This is what I'm talking about, giving them a chance to shine. But aside from giving that chance to shine, I hope it really helps illustrate that it's important that while you have the chance to shine for that character, the combat never relies on it. So you want to give that opportunity, but if you build encounters that rely on a certain character doing something specific, using an ability they have, you're often going to actually make it frustrating for the rest of the team because you don't know what players are going to do. I couldn't guarantee that this investigator was going to recall knowledge against that specific troll, or that type of troll, I should say, to find out the information so the team could deal with it. There had to be ways for the team to win even without that knowledge. And they could have. It just would have been a lot harder. It would have been a struggle. And it was made simpler. It was made more fluid by this action, but this wasn't required. This often happens when there's required flight in encounters, whether, again, they be in combat or not. It's, oh, hey, I know that there's flight available to the team, and so clearly they're going to think to use the flight. I can make it required. That's not great design. Great design says, yes, flight will be the path that makes this trivial or gives you some advantage. Maybe flight makes it so that you can get to the next encounter in a way that gives you the drop on the enemies. Whereas if you build yourself a bridge out of rocks or climb that wall, you're not going to get the drop on them. They're going to get the drop on you. Much worse situation, but still something you can accomplish as a team. So set up for the player to shine, but don't make it required for that player in order for the party to succeed. Okay, so that's great for my own adventures, your own homebrewed adventures, but what about those using adventure paths? Those are fixed, right? I mean, you've just got the encounter as it is. Well, I don't think that they are. No, these are built as a template, right? So you can run them exactly as they're written with the monsters that are listed, using the maps in the way that they're the most obvious ways to use them, but you don't have to go that route, and it doesn't take a lot to change it up. Again, my investigator, I think, is a great way to look at this. If there's, say 5 challenge rating 4 monsters in this room, and they are monster type A, maybe all you need is to switch them up to monster type B, which is, very simple to switch one creature out for another thanks to the way the encounter building rules work. Suddenly, now the team can rely on one player being able to have that standout moment to identify the new enemy to offer a better way to beat them, or to be better defenders against them, whatever it may be. Perhaps you switch out 2 of the 5 monsters to be flying enemies to give your ranged players a moment to shine as well. You don't have to do big changes. In a room, you don't have to change the layout of the room to make it more compatible for somebody's shining moment. Maybe what you just need to do is add in a slight obstacle of your own, something you can just speak to even. It doesn't have to be on the map. Perhaps it's something as simple as this area's got a lot of water in it. You're standing around in puddles where it doesn't show that on the map and it's not in the adventure path, and suddenly maybe that makes it more interesting for certain classes that manipulate water, certain kineticists or primal spellcasters, to do something more interesting than would otherwise be, and all you had to do was add some 2-inch high water. You can do small things to give standout moments that don't change an adventure path and don't require a lot of work from you either. Possibly a little bit of setup, but we're talking about the level of setup of I browsed through some monsters this morning. So it's not that you need to go out of your way to build all new encounters for your players. It's that you can cater these pre-built adventures just that little bit to give that shining moment. And also never forget, you always have the environment itself to play with as far as just what's going on in the air. Is it full of fungal spores? And you want to give a chance for that beefy barbarian with their high fortitude save to shine by easily saving when the rest of your characters might get diseases and they might have to push past and, handle shutting off some valve that gets rid of all the spores in the air. Very cool moment. Maybe it's just freezing cold in the area and you need your fire kineticist to heat things up so that everybody doesn't have to make saves to try to keep themselves from freezing to death. However you want to, you can mess with the environment in ways that aren't listed in the adventure path, require nothing of the map at all, and can just be spoken to. And as far as what you need for numbers, you can pretty much just rely on the chart of standard DCs for the level. It's a very easy thing to follow. Just lay out the standard DC as far as what they need to do for their fortitude, will, reflex save, whatever it may be, in the same way that you would use traps, only you don't even have to go that far, because traps can be very mechanically complex, whereas it's cold in here is pretty straightforward. Or this is noxious gas. Okay, if they fail, you can have them take a couple D6 of poison damage. You don't have to go crazy, but it can still offer a cool moment. And now that we've talked about catering encounters to each player to feel special, let's flip the coin over and exploit the team's weaknesses. Sometimes the most interesting thing a GM can do is make your party think. Provide them encounters that aren't solved the same way that they solve everything else. Once again, you know your party well, including what skills, mobility, tactical options that they all have, and what they're missing. it's time to exploit that weakness and show them why being well-rounded is so important. Does your party lack the ability to fly and have poor ranged combat capabilities? Maybe it's time to call in some flying enemies. Or enemies up high on a tower emplacement. No spells? Toss some magic in to block their way. No AoE damage? Bring on the swarms. Am I saying this just to be cruel? And doesn't this fly in the face of everything I've said so far? No and no. Well, at least I don't think so. Follow me here. Contrast is the spice. You can't fully appreciate the joy of hot peppers unless you eat food that isn't spicy at least some of the time. You can't fully appreciate the heroic moments each player receives until something comes along that no one is great at dealing with. The encounters aren't meant to be cruel or impossible tasks. They just don't lend themselves to the strengths of the party. Instead, they rely on collaborative brain power of the entire party, and that relies on you, the GM, ensuring that there are paths to success. Yes, those creatures are flying, but there are some newly sharpened javelins right over there in the corner because of where we are, and 2 of your players have rope if all else fails. So know when the party can cast a spell? Maybe they could find scrolls in a nearby basket that they could use, or decipher some runes on the wall that will allow them to bypass the magic. Or maybe it's a good time to go back and have a chat with the otherwise useless wizard about something they're offering up to help you with. And yes, those swarms aren't much fun to hit with a sword, but drop a boulder on them and your problem might be solved. Even though these kinds of encounters go beyond the natural capabilities, skills, or abilities listed on the page, as long as you leave options to the party, you've done your job of engaging and providing a memorable encounter. So how about those adventure paths? Because again, maybe they don't offer these things up. It's true that encounters in the adventure paths lean into catering to all parties, but that doesn't mean that minor tweaks won't make them come alive in the same way. While you generally want to stick to the page, it's fairly simple to add mechanics to exploration, which encourage the use of knowledge skills to surpass without taking the harder path, or to use those social encounters to force your players to use a non-charisma way to deal with the guards. For instance, maybe your barbarian's the best one to talk to a guard because they're not interested in how smooth a talker you are. They want somebody to arm wrestle. Great. This low charisma barbarian just succeeded at that social encounter because you decided to let it play out in a more unique sense. It is, however, by no means zero effort to come up with ways to adjust an adventure path to allow for these types of challenges that you're looking for, but understanding what your players don't do by default is a good place to start. I often consider what gives a team their greatest challenge, and rather than building an entire encounter around it, I adjust an encounter I had designed just enough to be that challenge. So, for instance, if I have a party of, let's say, murder hobos, and I have an encounter coming up that I had designed for both parties, perhaps the one tweak they get is that in this room, there is one creature that is still one of the monsters, but is actually wanting to talk to them and isn't actually actively wanting to get into combat with them, and shows it by how they position themselves on the battlefield, move around and hide more than fight. And that's a big part of how you can move on successfully in the adventure, is conversing rather than killing. It means they have to go into a social encounter, which they don't love, but it can mean the difference between a path that leads to some very cool options and a path that's more straightforward that leads to a lot more brutal combat. All right, I've talked about what I call 2 different sides of the coin. You can decide if they are or not, but the real magic comes down to how you balance them out and how many times you show each face. Personally, I like an 80-20 approach. 80% of the time, I build my encounters in such a way that allows a player to stand out. 20% of them force the party to think in a different way. If you lean too heavily into the second half that I talked about in this video and make it like 50% of the encounters were designed for their party to be challenged, it's going to feel like a slog and it'll probably be frustrating. On the other hand, if 100% are encounters that allow somebody to shine, that the team can move through with their normal patterns, it's not going to feel like you put enough tension into the game and they won't feel threatened in the right way. The balance won't be the same for every party or GM. In fact, everything I've said today may or may not fit into your campaign with your party. Only you know that. Any GM would about their party. I do hope that I've gotten something here for you to think about that might help you as you continue to plan out, or as you put together encounters 5 minutes before the game, because let's be honest, sometimes you don't have the time to plan ahead of that. I'd love to hear about some of your favorite encounters that you've run for your party members or times that they've stood out. Tell me in the comments, and as always, adventure on.